General Eisenhower informs me that the forces of Germany have surrendered to the United Nations. The flags of freedom fly.
World War II had ended, but its aftermath left Europe in ruins. While the battle against Nazi Germany had been won, the struggle for Europe's future was just beginning. At the heart of this new conflict stood Berlin, once the capital of a brutal regime, now divided between the victorious Allies. In this fractured city, the early tensions of the Cold War would come to a head, and a pivotal moment would define the future of Europe for decades. Berlin, a city caught between two starkly different worlds, became the first battleground of this ideological divide between the United States and the Soviet Union. As Western powers pushed for democracy and economic recovery, the Soviet Union sought to establish a sphere of influence through communist control. This divide soon escalated into direct confrontation, and the world watched as Berlin became the stage for one of the most dramatic standoffs in modern history. The Berlin blockade and the subsequent airlift were not just events of military strategy, they were symbols of this ideological conflict that would shape the Cold War. This documentary will explore the crisis in Berlin and the broader implications it had on global power dynamics during the early years of the Cold War. By the time World War II ended in 1945, Europe was in ruins, and the political landscape was in flux. The Yalta and Potsdam conferences divided Germany into 4 occupation zones, with Berlin, the capital, split between the Allies, even though it was deep within Soviet-controlled territory. This division meant to symbolize shared victory would later spark tensions over Europe's future. The cooperation among the Allies, united by the defeat of Nazi Germany, began to unravel. The Soviet Union, led by Joseph Stalin, sought to create a buffer of communist states in Eastern Europe to protect itself from future invasions. In contrast, the United States and the United Kingdom wanted democratic, free economies in Western Europe, supported by the Marshall Plan for economic recovery. As tensions grew, the Soviet Union became determined to maintain control over Eastern Europe and prevent the spread of democracy. This ideological rift between the Soviet Union and the Western Allies deepened the division of Germany and Berlin. The symbolic heart of the conflict became a focal point.
The Berlin blockade began on June 24, 1948, as Soviet forces blocked all land and water access to West Berlin, trapping 2 million people in a city surrounded by Soviet-controlled East Germany. This act was in response to the introduction of the Dutch mark in the western sectors of Berlin, a bold move to stabilize the economy in the face of mounting difficulties. The Soviet Union, under Joseph Stalin, viewed this as a direct challenge to their control over East Germany. The blockade was a clear attempt to force the Allies out of Berlin, but instead of retreating, the United States, the United Kingdom, and France embarked on a massive humanitarian and logistical operation, the Berlin airlift. General Lucius D. Clay, the American military governor in Germany, immediately recognized that the only way to supply West Berlin was by air. The situation required precision, speed, and resourcefulness on an unprecedented scale. The Western Allies quickly mobilized their military, civilian, and commercial resources to launch one of the largest humanitarian missions in history. The logistical challenge was immense as the Soviet Union controlled the airspace over East Berlin, yet the Allies were determined to keep West Berlin alive. The Berlin airlift kicked off on July 26, 1948, with the first cargo planes landing in Tempelhof Airport. Over the following months, the Allies faced enormous difficulties. The Soviet Union attempted to disrupt the airlift by jamming audio radio signals, using flares to signal planes to avoid certain areas, and spreading misinformation. Despite these efforts, the airlift continued undeterred. To keep up with the constant demand for supplies, the airlift grew exponentially in its peak month. September 1948, more than 200,000 tons of cargo were delivered by more than 9,000 flights. This was a feat of extraordinary coordination, with planes flying around the clock, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The airlift broke world records for the most flights ever undertaken in a single day, with over 1,400 flights in one 24-hour period, and at its height, a plane was landing in West Berlin every 30 seconds. Pilots used planes such as the C-47 Skytrain, C-54 Skymaster, and the British York transport aircraft. These planes were not designed for the job, but their robust designs and versatility made them ideal for the airlift's challenges. In total, over 277,000 flights were made, delivering over 2.3 million tons of food, coal, and medicine, as well as other essential supplies such as clothes and equipment. One of the most inspiring figures during this time was Captain Gail Halvorsen, an American pilot who became known as the Candy Bomber. Halvorsen took it upon himself to drop small packages of candy attached to handkerchiefs for the children of West Berlin. His simple act of kindness captured the hearts of millions, symbolizing the hope and humanity that defined the Western's response to Soviet aggression. Halvorsen's candy drops became a beacon of hope for children who had witnessed unimaginable hardship during the blockade. The Soviets, while continuing the blockade, did not escalate the situation into direct military conflict. likely due to the looming threat of nuclear war and the fragile balance of power at the time. The blockade remained in place for nearly a year, but on May 12, 1949, Stalin finally relented and lifted the blockade, facing a humiliating defeat. The Berlin airlift had succeeded not only in sustaining the city's residents, but also in demonstrating the strength of the Western resolve. The Berlin airlift was a victory for the Allies, cementing the division of Berlin and marking a clear line between the democratic West and the communist East. It also demonstrated the ability of the United States and its allies to overcome enormous logistical challenges and set the stage for Cold War dynamics that would shape the next several decades.
The immediate reaction to the Berlin airlift was triumphant for the Western Allies. The Soviet Union's blockade of West Berlin had been broken, and it was clear that the Allies' resolve could not be easily broken. The airlift demonstrated the determination and technological capabilities of the US and the UK, sending a clear message of resistance to the Soviet expansion. However, the blockade also solidified the division between East and West, deepening the ideological rift between capitalist and communist. For West Berliners, it was a life-saving success, but for the Eastern Bloc, the airlift served as a reminder of their isolation from the West and the tightening control of the Soviet Union. In the long term, the Berlin airlift reinforced the Cold War divide, cementing the ideological conflict between the US and the Soviet Union. It also led to the establishment of NATO and the Warsaw Pact as each side sought to strengthen their alliances. This event also marked the beginning of a more direct confrontation between the two superpowers, which would play out in proxy wars, arms race, and eventually space race. One unintended consequence was the increased militarization of both sides, leading to a more intense arms race. The airlift's success demonstrated the power of technological ingenuity and air logistics, setting a precedent for future military operations and humanitarian missions. The situation in Berlin also led to the eventual creation of the Berlin Wall in 1961, as the Soviet Union sought to prevent the flow of people from East Berlin to the West. The Berlin airlift left a profound impact on Europe. It not only changed the dynamics of Berlin, but also played a significant role in the formation of the European Economic Community. Shaping the future of Western Europe, it also influenced future Cold War policies, as it demonstrated the lengths to which the West would go to protect its interests. Globally, the airlift became a symbol of resilience, a moment where the West stood firm in the face of Soviet aggression. The Berlin airlift was a pivotal moment in the early Cold War, illustrating the fierce ideological struggle between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union. It not only marked the first major confrontation of the Cold War, but also solidified the division of Europe, laying the foundation for the geopolitical landscape that would define the next several decades. The unwavering resolve of the Western powers demonstrated through the airlift proved that they would not abandon their communities, even in the face of Soviet aggression. As we reflect on this event, it's essential to understand its long-lasting impact. The airlift reshaped international relations, catalyzed the formation of military alliances like NATO, and further entrenched the East-West divide that would persist until the collapse of the Soviet Union. More than just a military operation, it served as a symbol of resilience and solidarity, not only in Europe but around the world. The airlift proved that even in the darkest moments of the Cold War, human ingenuity and determination could overcome immense obstacles. The Berlin airlift was more than a historical event. It was a defining moment in the struggle for freedom and a reminder of the lengths to which nations will go to protect their values.